Um, I noticed that for most of the day, I am able to just kind of flow with whatever is happening. I'm home a lot. I'm retired at this point, and things are very nice. And I don't feel any agitation or fear or anxiety, and I don't distract myself with too many activities. I have a certain amount, and then something begins to happen in the evening around 9, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, in which I start to feel in the body, as well as the emotions, sort of an agitation, I would say. And I find myself being drawn outwards to look for, surfing the internet or whatever we distract ourselves with, which I don't have any inclination during the day to do. And it may be just what you were referring to a moment ago, that there's certain circumstances for me at that particular part of the day that maybe something in the body deeper down is coming up to the surface. But my mind, my self-critical mind, then interprets that as, well, some great meditator you are, some line you have as, being able to be present, and so, well, that's fine until 9 o'clock at night or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's very perplexing. I've sat with you. I was here 4 months ago, sitting with you, and I've done a lot of work for decades, actually. And it always startles me that this happens almost every night. And I guess if there is a question, it's how to approach this actual visceral, physical, these sensations as they come up, which then trigger thoughts. And
Yes.
you think
Yes.
you understand what I'm
Yes.
saying?
Yes. Your observation is very good. What's happening is that during the day, in the full waking state, there is a regular flow of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions. And although you may not be particularly interested in that flow, as you say, you may be able to. You're not really distracted by them. You're restful. You're at ease. This flow of thoughts and sensations is passing by. Nevertheless, they likely engage your attention, even if you don't fixate on any of them. Now, as the day wears on, the evening approaches, and in particular as the emptiness of deep sleep approaches, the activities, this constant procession of objects that were present during the full waking state, they begin to thin out. It's dark. There's not so many objects out there to see. The emails stop coming in. The phone stops ringing. There's no meal to cook. Everything is folding back up. Deep sleep, the peace of deep sleep is approaching. There are longer gaps between objects. So, although during the full-blown waking state you may not have been particularly interested in the flow of objects, nevertheless you were just lightly giving to your attention to each one as it came along. So your attention was always more or less engaged with a continuous flow of objects. But now there are some gaps opening up in the flow of objects. And during those gaps, there is nothing for you to give your attention to. And that is when the mind begins to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Help. There's nothing for me to derive my identity from anymore. There's just this emptiness, this lack of objects, of activity, and as a result, the surface, the underlying anxiety, which in your case is obviously just very subtle. This subtle anxiety, this subtle resistance to the now, begins to make itself felt. It couldn't be felt before because our intention was so exclusively engaged, albeit lightly in your case, on objects. But now there are some gaps, and in that gap, up begins to bubble this, just a very slight feeling of dissatisfaction. It's not a big deal. It doesn't, you are no longer going to the bottle or to the fridge. It's very subtle. It's just this slight feeling something is missing. Something, and immediately that translates into an idea in the mind. Go for an object, and the internet is the easiest. You type in something into Google, and off you are. You've given the mind a new train of objects to get busy with. As soon as you're busy with whatever it is on the internet, surprise, surprise, we no longer feel the anxiety. So why? Because our focus is on the object, not on the feeling. So the feeling we think the feeling has gone. No, it hasn't gone. It's just gone back down to sleep in the body where it's lived comfortably all these years. And the message the mind gets is, good, surf the internet. That's the way of getting rid of my anxiety. Surf the internet in your case, or attach myself to an object, basically. That's the way of not having to feel the discomfort of this anxiety. So the next time it arises, onto Google again. And in this way we learn, in this case quite subtly, to manage our anxiety, our restlessness, the sense of lack, the fear of disappearance. Of course, all the addictions to substances and activities, etc., are grosser forms of exactly the same thing. But this has become more refined in your case. It's not bad for your health, it's not illegal, it's just this subtle attaching your attention to an object. So the thing to do, and you've noticed this, so the thing to do in this case would be to see the impulse. First of all, feel the discomfort as the gaps in the objects begin to open up, as the waking state begins to prepare to dissolve in sleep. You notice the gaps in the objects. You notice how the anxiety or the discomfort or the dis-ease or the sense of lack begins to rise. You then notice the impulse to relieve that discomfort through giving your attention to an object. And this is where you need both clarity and courage. The clarity you already have. You see the mechanism. So now the courage is not to do what your mind is telling you to do, which is fix your attention on an object, not because you're interested in the content of your Google search. You're not really interested in it. What you're interested in doing is not feeling the feeling, not feeling the discomfort of the feeling. So there is where you need to be courageous. You notice the feeling come up, and then you say, okay, this time I'm going to face the feeling. I'm going to allow the feeling. I'm not going to do what my mind is telling me to do, which is to avoid the feeling. And it'll be uncomfortable. It's precisely because the feeling is uncomfortable that you're trying to avoid it in the first place. And if you let it come up more, it's going to get more uncomfortable. And the mind is going to cry out for you to do something, to give your attention to something to relieve the discomfort. So you have to be courageous. Allow the feeling to come up. Don't do what the feeling is telling you to do, which is to avoid it. Do the opposite. Face it. Allow it in.
It's almost if, I think some part of me feels if I allow that in, it may overwhelm me. You know that?
Risk it.
Yeah, okay.
Risk being overwhelmed by it. What would be overwhelmed by it? You see, that is another subtle strategy of the mind, saying, oh no, I can't do this because I might get overwhelmed by it. Therefore, that validates your desire. This is just the subtle tricks that the mind plays on us. You're not going to get overwhelmed. Awareness cannot be overwhelmed. What will be overwhelmed will be the fictitious self that derives its identity from resisting these feelings and seeking objects. It's that identity that feels, if I carry on allowing these feelings, I, this fictitious entity, am going to disappear. It's not you that's going to be overwhelmed. It's not the true and only you that is going to be overwhelmed. You cannot be overwhelmed. But the fictitious self does feel, if he carries on doing this, my days are numbered. And the separate self will go into a little bit of rebellion and will try to persuade you, oh no, if you carry on doing this, you're going to get overwhelmed. You shouldn't do this. This is dangerous. Go back to the internet. But again, see the mechanism. Be clear about what's happening. Don't believe thought or the thought-made self when it tells you stories about being overwhelmed by feelings. It's not possible to be overwhelmed by a feeling. Even the deepest depression doesn't overwhelm awareness any more than the blackest image veils a screen. The screen cannot be veiled. Awareness cannot be overwhelmed. So see that rationally, see the logic of that, and allow that clarity at the level of the mind to give you the courage to face the feeling, knowing that it's not going to overwhelm you. But you have to discover that it's not going to overwhelm you. And you do that by facing it and inviting it, more than just facing it. You say to the feeling, okay, I spent most of my life engaged in activities that were designed specifically to repress you. Now, okay, now you come right on in. I'm going to do the opposite. You are completely welcome. You come on in.
Thank you.
And see what happens. Just take that approach and see where it takes you.
I will.